Today, the World Cup fits inside your pocket. The goals, the replays, the slow motion, the arguments, the highlights, all of it arrives in seconds, on a screen you carry everywhere. But in 1950, for millions of families around the world, the biggest sporting event on Earth wasn't something they watched. It was something they heard, and read, and imagined, and waited for. And that one difference changed everything about how it felt. If a goal went in, you might hear it a half second before you understood it, just a roar climbing in the announcer's voice. If the radio signal faded at the wrong moment, the whole room froze until it came back. And if you missed the next morning's newspaper, the biggest match on Earth could reach you as a rumor, passed from one neighbor to the next. No rewind, no highlights, just a radio, a newspaper, and the strange tension of not knowing. Stay with me, because this slow, fragile way of following a game once turned a single match into a silence so deep that an entire nation is still talking about it today. We gained the perfect view of every goal. We may have lost the feeling of a whole room holding its breath around one small radio. Start with how strange the world of 1950 already was. This was the first World Cup in 12 years. The 1942 and 1946 tournaments had been erased by the Second World War, so this was the first time the planet had played for the trophy since 1938. And almost nobody saw a second of it. Even in Brazil, the host country, television had barely been born. The nation's first TV station didn't switch on until a few months after the final whistle. So the radio wasn't a way to follow the game. The radio was the game. Families pulled their chairs up to the big wooden radio cabinet in the front room, the father chasing the signal on the dial, the mother setting down her work, everyone facing a box that showed them nothing and somehow showed them everything. Which meant the announcer was the camera. Every angle we take for granted now, one man's voice had to build out of nothing but words and timing. He was the wide shot and the close-up and the slow-motion replay all at once. A sudden climb in his pitch, a held breath, the long drag on the word goal. And a whole living room saw a play that none of them could actually see. His voice didn't just report the action, it set the temperature of the room. A shout, and everyone leapt up. A flat, heavy tone, and you knew, before he said a single word, that something had gone wrong. Children who couldn't follow the play at all just watched their parents' faces and read the score off the room. If the radio was the screen, the newspaper was the replay. And it didn't arrive until the next morning. No clips, no highlight reels, no slow motion to settle a fight. The paper, with its photographs and its headlines and its written account, was how a family pieced the match back together the next day. And here is something most Americans have never heard, even though it happened to their own team. In that 1950 tournament, the United States sent a squad of part-timers to Brazil, a dishwasher, a man who drove a hearse for his uncle's funeral home, a couple of mailmen, a school teacher, a team that had trained together exactly once. And that team walked onto a field in Belo Horizonte and beat England, the country that invented the game, 1-0. The bookmakers had put the Americans at 500-1. It is still considered one of the greatest upsets in the history of sport. And back home, it barely made a sound. Because in 1950, America, soccer lived deep in the shadow of baseball and boxing. The result was so impossible that, as the story has long been told, some editors who got the score over the wire assumed it was a misprint. That part is probably more legend than fact. But it tells you everything about a world where news crossed an ocean slowly. by cable and print, and could simply be too strange to believe. A radio was also a real expense in 1950, and that gave the whole thing a shape we've completely lost. The family on the block that owned a set quietly turned into a kind of broadcast station for everyone around them. Neighbors crowded into the front room. Cafes and bars turned a single radio up loud so a crowd could lean in over their drinks. In the town square, one set could hold 100 people dead still, and the families with no radio at all leaned on the ones who had it. A child sent next door to listen, then sprinting back to the kitchen to deliver the score to the grandparents. Following the World Cup was not something you did by yourself. It was something that pulled an entire street together around one source of sound. Today, millions of us can watch the very same match in perfect clarity, every one of us completely alone. In 1950, one radio could fill a room with people. And then there was the waiting, which is the part we'd find hardest of all. The score didn't arrive the instant it happened. Broadcasts crackled and faded, and sometimes dropped out entirely, and when the signal went, the room went with it. Everyone frozen, leaning toward the static, willing the voice to come back. Between updates, there were long minutes of simply not knowing, and a family had to sit inside that silence together. And strangely, having no picture didn't shrink the tension, it blew it up. When you can't see what's happening, your imagination rushes in to fill the gap, and it fills it with hope and dread in equal measure. The empty space between bulletins wasn't dead air. It was the drama. There was one more consequence of all this that's almost impossible to picture today. Without a replay, wrong information could live for days. If the announcer misspoke, or the signal cut at the worst moment, or one neighbor misheard and passed it down the line, there was no clip to pull up and prove what really happened. An argument about a single play could run for a week. And the most spectacular example of that came at the very end of the tournament, because an entire nation got the result wrong before the game was even played. Brazil, the host, reached the final round needing only a draw against Uruguay to be champions. The country was so certain that newspapers printed editions crowning Brazil world champions in advance. A victory song had already been composed. Speeches of congratulation were already drafted and waiting. The replay, in a sense, got published before the match. And then they actually played it. Nearly 200,000 people packed into the brand new Maracanã Stadium in Rio, the official count near 174,000, and more once you add everyone who climbed the walls to get in. Brazil scored. The coronation was on. And then, with 11 minutes left, a Uruguayan named Alcides Gigia slipped the ball past the keeper, and Uruguay won, 2-1. The largest crowd ever gathered for a football match went completely silent, a silence that became as famous as any goal ever scored. And here is the part that matters for our story. That silence didn't stay in the stadium. It came pouring out of every radio in the country, into kitchens and front rooms, and the packed cafes where people had gathered to celebrate. A whole nation found out, in the same breathless instant, sitting around their radios, that the trophy they'd already been handed was gone. There was no replay to soften the blow, no clip to rewind, no way to go back and make it untrue. If you lived in Brazil that afternoon, you didn't watch it happen. You felt it happen, through a wooden box, in a room full of people who would remember exactly where they were standing for the rest of their lives. So what did those families have that we don't? Let's be fair, we have gained an enormous amount. We have more access than any generation in history. Every match in our pocket, every angle, every goal the instant it lands. But we have less waiting, more information, and somehow less imagination. More screens, and far fewer reasons to crowd into one room. The 1950 World Cup wasn't really about the football. It was a window into how the whole world once lived a great event, slowly, fragile, and together, around a single voice coming out of a wooden cabinet, close enough to reach out and touch. We gained the perfect view of every goal, but we may have lost the feeling of an entire room holding its breath around one small radio. So if you can still remember crowding around a radio or one television set for a big match or a big moment, tell me in the comments who you were with and the one you've never been able to forget.